let us reintroduce you to a guy who just can't help himself.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today and every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
All right, welcome in. It is Wednesday. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. And we are talking about Scott Frost. In July of 2025, it is now 2 months short of 3 years after he was fired at Nebraska, and he's back in the news. Why? Because Scott Frost couldn't stay quiet about the Huskers on Tuesday at Big 12 Media Days in Frisco, Texas. He seemed to want to stay quiet about Nebraska, steered clear of it when speaking at the podium at the Big 12 Media Days event, said on the ESPN set that he had a little, quote, detour between his stints at UCF. Then he went into a conference room with a couple of reporters from The Athletic, Chris Vanini and David Ubben, and now everyone is talking about Scott Frost again and the ugliness that exists between him and his alma mater. Yeah. Connor, your thoughts?
So should we just lay this whole thing out, the quotes first? Because like you said, what he said on the stage, wasn't bad. As we predicted yesterday in the show,
fine.
He's going to get asked about it. He's going to make some sort of glancing reference to it, and try not to talk about it. But then, like you said, the day goes on, you get asked enough about it from various different people. And then he said, right, he didn't want to talk about the last place, just same way he did in his opening press conference at UCF, referred to Nebraska as the last place, which once again, weird.
That's just a little smug, yeah.
Weird, but I don't really have an issue with it. And I'll get to my real issue with this in a second, but let's get to the quotes.
Well, let me set it up and say, because I think there are some people out there, and I've caught a little bit of this on social media or in comments from our articles at The Athletic, like, why don't you media just respect him and stop asking when he says he doesn't want to talk about it? Well, this is Scott's first opportunity at UCF in front of national media. He hasn't done a big tour or had all kinds of people coming into Orlando. His press conference there when he was reintroduced was in front of media from Florida who wanted to talk about Central Florida. So this was like the first test, and he was not coaxed and prodded. The quote that we're going to read here in a second came when Chris and David, and I have listened to the audio of this, asked Frost about his decision back in 2017 and how hard it was to leave UCF. Not necessarily, can you talk about Nebraska? Just remember that game.
Yep.
That game. Chris said, I was on the field at that game against Memphis, the double overtime game. And at the time, you knew, correct, that you were going to have to make this hard decision. And then Frost said, I always said I would never leave unless it was someplace you could go and potentially win a national championship. And, I got tugged in a direction to go try to help my alma mater. And I didn't really want to do it. It wasn't a good move. And I'm lucky that I have an opportunity to get back to a place where I was a lot happier.
Yeah. He did. I mean, for the record, there was a lot of people, this is well documented. There was a lot of people who were saying, hey, look, man, you kind of, it's the right time. It's time for you to do this. And, this feels like the right moment for you to be the head coach at Nebraska. To which he agreed to and willingly walked into the Nebraska job. And as we've mentioned many, many times, it didn't have to be bad, but it was. But clearly Scott thinks that it was other factors that made his experience at Nebraska not as good as it could have been. So just to be clear here, I am not mad at Scott Frost because he said things about Nebraska and I feel the weird need to like blindly defend Nebraska. I mean that because I feel like there's two sets of people. I'm not sure, but people are like, man, don't talk about Nebraska that way. You can't talk about Nebraska that way. Otherwise, whatever. That stuff doesn't bother me. People could say whatever. He could say whatever he wants.
Right. There's the don't disrespect us camp.
I am mad that he won't take any responsibility for and it's really not that I'm mad, it's that I'm disappointed. It's that I'm frustrated. I want him to mature. I want him to take ownership. I want that for him, but he's clearly not going to do it. I'm rooting for him to wake up. I'm rooting for him to kind of understand, have a more clear understanding of how exactly it went. We weren't inside the walls of when he was here, and I'm sure it was difficult, and he ran into a lot of things that were definitely out of his control. But I would really like to hear him say, man, that was a different version of me. That was 7-8 years ago, and I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And maybe looking back in retrospect, I wasn't ready or something like that. But
even if you don't believe that, say it. Just own it, man. Yeah. Like you were 16-31. You went 5-22 in one-score games. It was one of, if not the most disappointing tenures for a football coach in this century of major college football. It's hard to find anything that had more build-up and fell flat. Very, very few positive moments, good wins in that stretch. So good players. There were people and good people who came through, but they were never able to put it together. And that has to reflect on the person in charge. And when you're a leader like that and you continue on in your career to go lead another program, it reflects well on you as a coach if you are accountable, if you stand up and own your failures in the same way that you do your successes. And I think that's what you and a lot of other people are looking for from Scott in this moment.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't care what he said about Nebraska. Obviously his relationship with Nebraska is always going to be strained. I think it'll be less strained once he just kind of, wakes up and sees it, a different way, the way that everybody else seems to see it. But maybe he goes down to UCF on the second stint and has success, and then he'll be able to say, at the end of it, maybe he probably won't, touch it this way, but at the end of that, he'll say, well, look, I was a great coach here the first time. I was a great coach here the second time, and I wasn't a good coach at Nebraska. So what does that mean? Does that mean I'm sometimes not a good coach, or is that a poor reflection on Nebraska? And everyone will say, oh, well, that's probably a poor reflection on Nebraska. But so we don't really, he will be able to have that, plausible deniability at the end of it. And he will be able to say, hey, look, this isn't my fault. But I just wish there was a little bit of like, hey, I could have done some things. I wish I would have done some things a little bit differently in my time coming back to my alma mater.
Yeah, that's just kind of clearly not his style. I mean, the one thing that he said that I think Nebraska fans can agree with is that it wasn't a good move. In retrospect, from the Nebraska point of view, no, it wasn't. Even though it looked like a slam dunk back in late 2017, it was not a good move for him to come home. And he did provide some insight, even more insight than what we knew at the time and what we learned when Frost went back to Orlando in December of last year. That really deep down, it was not what his heart was telling him to do. So later in the conversation with the reporters from The Athletic, and they talked for about 15 minutes, the guys asked him what he learned from the experience of having gone through all of this. and he said, don't take the wrong job. That's what I learned. Make sure you're working for and around good people. So he is throwing some shade at the people who worked for and around him at Nebraska. And I think the first place you're going to think that your mind is going to go with that is the athletic director, the two athletic directors for whom he worked. Bill Moose hired him and Trev Alberts fired him. And you would be hard pressed to find two athletic directors working in the last 10 years of college athletics who managed with more different styles than Bill Moose and Trev Alberts. So the way that they approached Scott Frost were completely different. And maybe Frost needed somebody more in the middle. Maybe Moose was gave him too much autonomy, too much freedom. And maybe Trev ruled with too much of an iron fist. But the fact that he was unable to work with both of them and said as much on Tuesday in reviewing his time at Nebraska makes you wonder if it's not more about him than it is about the leaders who were in charge.
By the time Trev rolled around, I mean, it was already over. It was borderline. There was basically no saving it at that point. I know people wanted to believe that, but it was over. The book was written at that point. So it's really, in my mind, it's really about Moose, which is crazy because the whole conversation for the first several months, before they played their first game when he was here, was, man, I love this. The situation is finally right here. The right people are in charge. There's alignment from top to bottom. We have what we need. We're going to go do this. And I think if you would have asked him, halfway, even when they were 0-6 in his first season, he would have said, yeah, I still believe that. Like the alignment is still good. Everything is going, we're not on path right now as it pertains to wins and losses, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there. And I just wonder at what point he stopped believing that. And at what point he gave in to like, actually, this sucks. And because that was the point where, whenever he gave up, that's when it reached the point of no return.
Connor, I think there was a part of him that felt that way at the start. And I think you could see it on his face and hear it in his words at his introductory press conference. And at the time, the people in Nebraska, we believed that the reason that he looked and sounded like that was because he had such such strong feelings about UCF. And in the narrative that we had drawn up at that time, and I think some of this does hold true, part of the reason that he was a great coach at Central Florida in 2016 and 2017, and part of the reason that he had success at Oregon is because he invested so much personally and emotionally in that team and in those players. And somewhere along the way, and so if that's the case, you are going to be somewhat sad when you up and leave a 12-0 team or any team. They could have been 0-12 and go somewhere halfway across the country where you no longer have any connection with them. You're going to probably look and sound like he did in some way. But as you look back on it, some of it may have also been related to the fact that it just wasn't what he felt was right for him. So
yeah. And so here's one more thing, and we'll take a break. Back to the ownership of it. So then by taking the job, you are not only doing a disservice if it is that way. By taking the job, you're not only doing a disservice to your alma mater, you're doing a serious disservice to yourself. And that's, I think that was kind of his point. It probably came out wrong, like many of the things he said during his time being a college football head coach. It just, his quotes just hit brashly at times. But man, it's just everybody's got a different perspective on it, and it seems like he has a much different perspective than many, many others.
Yeah. All right, we're going to come back and wrap up our talk about Big 12 Media Days with some takes on other conversations and topics that were flying around the room Tuesday in Texas. That's coming up next.
But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook, where summer sports are in full swing. And whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel has the best way to make every game even more exciting. So you're already following all the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling with FanDuel? You could get in the game while your friends are getting sunburn at the beach, or while you're getting sunburn at the beach, to be honest, as well. You could pull that up, wherever it may be legal. So use the fast payout options. You could get that quickly. The same game parlays, the overs, unders, everything you could find on the FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel makes it feel like you are a part of the action. Yes, even if you are getting sunburn on the beach. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or head to FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. All right, Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman back with you. I think we're done with the Frost part of the show, right?
I think so. I think we've exhausted it. Yes.
All right. Other stuff from Big 12 media days yesterday. Scott Satterfield, the head coach of Cincinnati. Most Nebraska fans took a turn to Scott Frost yesterday at Big 12 media days, but Nebraska's first opponent, their next game is against Cincinnati. Scott Satterfield is their coach. You watched some of that press conference, Mitch. What did you think about where he feels like his team is at right now?
Yeah, going into it, I was in front of my TV and my computer because you could get the live feed of the press conferences at the podium on ESPN Plus, and then ESPN had their own set where their hosts were interviewing each coach. So you got two little segments with each coach, and I may have to do that a little bit today too because I'm curious about Deion Sanders. One, if Deion Sanders is there at Big 12 Media Days, and there's some question about that, or at least there was yesterday. And others like Mike Gundy, Kenny Dillingham. So it's a good lineup, an interesting lineup of coaches in that league. I thought Satterfield was going to be the guy that I came away most with the most to say or think about going into Tuesday, even though we talked on this show about how we would probably be conversing on topics related to Scott Frost here today on Tuesday. We talked about that on Monday. It was Satterfield who had more of my interest because it's more directly related.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that's directly related to what's going on with the Huskers here in 2025. So he was not like really notable with
Did you learn
anything.
anything?
So, yeah, well, Cincinnati felt like they had big upgrades to make to their secondary and their wide receiver core after last offseason. They're happy with the quarterback, Brendan Sorsby, that they have coming back. They got a running back transfer from Wisconsin who they like. They feel like they have a good 1-2 punch in the backfield. Faced a lot of stacked boxes last year because they didn't have the speed at wide receiver to be able to take the top off of a defense, and they think that they've upgraded in that area. So there's a question about their secondary right now and whether the players who they brought in from the portal can adjust and lock in as a part of this defense that is up to the challenge that they feel their front seven or front eight is going to be up to. Look, it's a team that went 8-16 over the past two seasons, and yet they believe that they have a chance to contend for a championship in the Big 12 this year. So everybody has optimism and has hope when it gets to media days season in July, and Scott Satterfield and Cincinnati are no different than that. Great tight end that Cincinnati has. They've got a defensive, and he was there at media days, and they have a defensive lineman who was an all-conference or even like an all-American caliber player 2 years ago, and then was injured for part of last season. So they feel like he's back at a level that should be disruptive for a team like Nebraska on August 28th at Arrowhead Stadium. I did find it interesting, and maybe maybe this was like the most notable thing to me, at least from the Nebraska perspective, that Satterfield had to say. He talked a couple of times about the opener at Arrowhead and about how it's a neutral site, almost like he was trying to convince himself that it wasn't going to be a game where they faced 50 to 60,000 screaming Nebraska fans. And he also said, well, there'll be a lot of people there in red. And he's talking about both teams wearing the color red. Like you can talk and say all you want about like how this is like a level field as far as the venue goes. When you
Mm.
walk out, he can tell his team that. It indicates to me that maybe he's a little concerned about like what they're going to face as far as like the environment at Arrowhead, just because of the way that he phrased things on Tuesday. So it's not going to be, neutral in name only.
I would imagine that if he comes out and says like, hey, if he comes up to Big 12 Media Days yesterday and has the attitude of, well, like, hey, it's a neutral site game, but everyone knows it's not a neutral site game, which is the truth. Everyone knows it's not a neutral site game. But if he did say that, it would probably not reflect very, very, very fondly on his administration, because
sure.
Originally it's a home game, and then it was supposed to be in Indianapolis, and obviously they are profiting off of the Nebraska fans in this specific case. So he probably like can't do that. But I wonder what the mindset's like in his in his locker room.
Yeah, it just kind of indicated to me that it's on his mind. Like it's there for him. He's thinking about that and probably trying to find ways to to deal with this like it's a road game. And I'm sure his players can understand that and get the vibe from their coach. But maybe some of them are going to be surprised when they walk out on the field for warmups and get relentlessly booed by people wearing what appears to be the colors that support their own team.
Yeah, they'll figure out which red it is very, very quickly in Kansas City, coming up in 7 weeks or 8 weeks from tomorrow.
Man, oh, it's a Thursday game. You're right. Yeah, man, we're getting there. Yeah. We're less than 2 weeks to Nebraska's day on the stage at Big Ten Media Days. And part of what watching the proceedings in Frisco yesterday, I enjoyed listening to Chris Kleiman, by the way, and Matt Campbell. Maybe we can talk more about those guys at some point if there's a quiet moment here in the next 2 weeks, and like the relevance that both of their programs have to Nebraska, one being directly to the south and one being directly to the east, and just what it means for Nebraska recruiting, that Kansas State and Iowa State are just kind of continuing to do their thing in the Big 12 and like happy to do it, and maybe they'll get playoff spots occasionally from it, while Matt Rule and Nebraska are trying to do things differently in the Big Ten. And there's reason for that, because Nebraska hasn't had the success that Kansas State and Iowa State have had in recent years. There was a moment where Satterfield was on set with ESPN, and I think it was Matt Berry, who's the host of the proceedings, made mention of the opener at Arrowhead, and Satterfield gave his comments, and Barry said, "Don't get me started on why I think Nebraska should be is more of a Big 12 team than a Big 10 team." But so it's funny that like that conversation still exists around the Big 12 14 years after Nebraska left the league.
I love that. Anytime I've watched a big, like, that has come up a few times over the last 15 years since Nebraska's been gone as well. Like, I'll just, something that doesn't have anything to do with Nebraska, but it's a Big 12 related item. Just like, man, remember those old days when it was Nebraska and the Big 12 North and all those things. And I'm like, wow, they miss Nebraska.
You guys still talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I miss them. I as a Nebraska fan, a follower, whatever, a media person, I miss the Big 12 people as well.
There were a couple questions for Satterfield during his time at the main podium about Matt Rule and Nebraska, and like what he thinks of Matt Rule watching him from afar. And Satterfield, they weren't like the super weird questions that you get occasionally from the Big Ten throng of media. I don't know if we're going to get those as maybe it'll be even more of that in Las Vegas. But Satterfield was kind of like, why am I getting asked about Matt Rule? Maybe it was like the Baylor contingent, because the Bears were up on Tuesday as well, who wanted to get some sound or a quick quote from the Cincinnati coach about Matt Rule. Also, Brent Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner. Did you see his press conference?
Yeah, I did.
Why does he have to have a conversation like a fireside chat with all of the media who wanted to ask him questions at Media Day? Like, they took the mic and this is Barry Trammell from the Tulsa World.
Hey, Barry.
Hey, Barry, I think you asked me my first question as commissioner of the Big 12 2 years ago.
I don't trust that guy. I don't trust Brett Yormark. Like that guy comes off as extremely fake to me. But he's running a conference that's swimming upstream a little bit.
He's supportive of the 5-11 model, which was a little surprising to me. Actually, I thought the Big 12 would be happy with the 4-4-2-2-3-1-1-1, maybe because it would guarantee you 2 teams.
Right now, they're only guaranteed 1. Right, so
if it goes 5-11, which is far from a
correct. But they're throwing their support behind a 5-11 model, which is kind of interesting. It might not serve them very well in the long run. I was looking back at some Big 12 championship games yesterday during my show and just like, this is what would have happened if if it was a 5-11 model, if 2 at-larges would have made it. There's most of the years they get 2 anyway. Last year, no. Last year was, any way you cut it, the winner was getting in and the loser wasn't, because it was Iowa State and Arizona State, and they were ranked right around 15 or 16, both of them. Loser was going home no matter what.
So the Big 12 is going to back the SEC in this.
Interesting.
The SEC, which stole their 2 premier programs, they're going to back the SEC in this argument. And maybe the Big 10 by the end of the summer, or right now, is standing on its own in the 4-4-2-2, etc.
Like definitely seems like it.
Yeah. All right. Should we take a break? Should we come back and conclude this show with day 3 in our countdown to Big 10 Media Days?
Yes.
All right. Let's do that. That's coming up next. It is day 3 of our countdown to Big 10 Media Days. We are now, as I mentioned, less than 2 weeks away from Nebraska being on stage in Las Vegas with Matt Rule, Dylan Raiola, Henry Lutovsky, and Deshaun Singleton. Yesterday, we decided to name this countdown the Bowl of Fascination. So
that's right.
What? Is that weird?
No, it's funny. I like it. We're gonna reach in. What are we gonna grab?
Reach into the bowl. Who do we got from the bowl today?
Looks like it says Sierra Wright. Sierra Wright, the actor, is who we're talking about today for the Bowl of Fascination.
So why is Sierra Wright fascinating for Nebraska as it barrels toward preseason camp and the August 28th opener against Cincinnati and Brendan Sorsby, who threw for 400+ yards against Texas Tech last year?
Because I think there is a wide-ranging swath of opinions on like what he is right now, what he brings to the table at the confidence level that people have in him, and then what his ceiling could be. Like if it works out and Sierra Wright stays on the same track as he was at the end of last year, you could potentially be looking at number one, an obvious lockdown starter, but like maybe an all Big Ten caliber type of guy. He's a highly, rated recruit. You're just getting his feet under him last year because he joined right around this time last year. Wasn't much of a factor early on in the season, then really came on late. So if he could continue to capitalize off of that momentum that he got at the end of last year and the confidence that you get from it, you could be looking at you could be looking at a really good player and potentially one of, if not Nebraska's very best defender, which I mean that would be, I think, at the top of the at the top of the possibilities for him. If not, then Nebraska's defense has some more questions to answer. Like if you could take a lockdown corner right there and say, yep, I feel good about him, put him on one side of the field and forget about it, then man, that really changes the look of your defense.
Yeah, who is Nebraska's best defensive player? I think that's an intriguing question. I'm sorry, it's a fascinating question to head into camp. Like you would like to say that it's somebody up front who can just manhandle a couple of offensive linemen, but unless Riley Van Poppel, who was the leadoff man in our Bowl of Fascination, unless he's taken a jump that you might expect to see from him, like in his third or fourth year. This is his third year, like in his fourth or fifth year on campus. it's probably not coming from the D line. And then your linebackers are either new to the program or they're relatively inexperienced. So you have experience in the secondary, and you might say that that person is Deshaun Singleton. Some people will take great offense to that because they feel like Deshaun Singleton struggled in coverage last year in the secondary or struggled with his tackling. Like I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I think that Isaac Gifford had his struggles, and that Singleton was probably a more consistent player. And I take at face value what Matt Rule says about Deshaun Singleton, that he could have been somebody who ended up in the NFL this year if he had chosen to go that route. But, he saw like what another year for somebody like Ty Robinson did, and believes that he can come back. And if he's healthy and playing with a defense that's operating on all cylinders, then he's going to improve his ability to play in the NFL. Like Sear Wright, from the time that he jumped into the lineup midseason, I think was the most consistent player in the Nebraska secondary. Had the pick 6 against USC. And, that's interesting because his career up to that point had been marked by inconsistency. His career at USC, there were the bright spots early on. And then in 2023, he just kind of fell off the map. And you wonder going into year 2 at Nebraska, it's like, all right, is there a pattern here? Is it going to be a thing where we see like some highs from Sear Wright and then like some lows, like if he loses focus? And I don't think that's fair to him. I think he's in a good place as an athlete. Like I think he's matured since the beginning of his time. I think that there was a lot of stuff going on at USC with that defense in 2023. It was a mess. They fired a coordinator at the end of the year, and I don't think that's on him. But it's something you have to watch. Like, is he going to be consistent?
Yeah, it's just really interesting. Like you're putting, if you are doing what I said before, which is like, hey, let's just put him on one side of the field and he's he's going to be our lockdown on that side. Like it's a lot to put on his shoulders given the lack of consistent production so far, right? Like ideally you want to have a full year or two under you before you say, all right, yeah, this guy is our best guy. But it very well could turn out that way for him. And so the higher, the closer he gets to the top of his ceiling, obviously, same as the case for everybody else, the better off Nebraska's defense is going to have a chance to be. But I do think he's a really like important swing piece for them. How good is he? What exactly can Nebraska get out of him? They can go deeper at that position, which is nice. But I think there's a couple guys at the top who, if they hit, Mills and Marshall, if they really hit, you got yourself a pretty good situation back there for the corners at least.
Yeah. I mean, you can say this about any corner, but I think that the secondary, kind of you're only as strong as your weakest link. And, you hope that Sear Wright is Nebraska's strongest link, but like you need to have 2 corners who can lock things down. Probably more than 2. So I think we'll probably get to another corner later in this countdown. There's at least one other one out there on this in the bowl for us, a name in the big bowl, like 25 names to start in the bowl, who also plays that position. So it's essential for Nebraska to have 2 guys on the edge, which they didn't really have in a reliable form after Tommy Hill went down last season with the injury early in the year. To be able to just say, all right, those guys are okay out there on an island. Now let's go focus on the other things that we do well on defense. So Sear Wright's a big piece in getting back to that level for John Butler and his defense.
All right, we'll see who we pluck out of the bowl tomorrow, and we'll see what comes out of Big 12 Media Days today. Probably less emotionally attached, maybe, to Nebraska.
I don't know. Maybe Dion's going to get us all fired up. Probably not.
It's possible. You never know. You never know what you're going to see at Big 12 Media Days, which is something that apparently we're paying attention to. Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out The Portal Show with Brian Smith, and you can check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. See you tomorrow.